The Philippines is a beautiful island country that is home to numerous indigenous peoples, often referred to as lumads, who have a long and rich history and culture. Despite their contributions to the nation, the indigenous peoples of the Philippines face many challenges in terms of their rights, with their ancestral lands being threatened by corporate and political interests, and their cultures being threatened by assimilation. In recent years, indigenous rights have been increasingly addressed by the Philippine government, with a variety of laws and policies being implemented to protect indigenous cultures and rights. The indigenous peoples of the Philippines, which include the Ata, Agta, Ati, and many other groups, have inhabited the islands since time immemorial, and they have their own distinct cultures, languages, and beliefs that have been passed down through generations. Despite this, indigenous peoples have historically been marginalized and excluded from mainstream society, with their cultures and ways of life being viewed as inferior. This has led to the loss of their ancestral lands, with corporations and the government taking over their traditional territories and using them for resource extraction and development. This has had a devastating impact on indigenous communities, as they are displaced from their ancestral lands and denied access to important resources. In recent years, however, the government of the Philippines has begun to recognize the importance of indigenous rights and has implemented a range of legislation and policies aimed at protecting and promoting the rights of indigenous peoples. In 2009, the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, IPRA, was passed, which guarantees the rights of indigenous peoples to their ancestral lands, natural resources, and cultural heritage. The law also recognizes the collective ownership of ancestral lands, and it provides for the establishment of indigenous protected areas that are managed by indigenous communities. In addition, the Philippine government has taken steps to ensure that indigenous peoples are included in the decision-making process on matters that affect their lives. The Indigenous Peoples Mandatory Representation Law, IPMR, was passed in 2017, which requires the participation of indigenous peoples in local, regional, and national governments, as well as in the private sector. The law aims to ensure that indigenous peoples have a voice in the decision-making process, and it serves as a tool for them to actively participate in the development of their communities. Moreover, the government has implemented several programs to promote the economic and social development of indigenous communities. The Pantavid Pamilyang Pilipino program, 4 PITA seconds, for example, provides financial assistance to indigenous households to help them meet their basic needs. Additionally, the Indigenous Peoples Education Program, IPEP, was launched in 2018 to improve education outcomes for indigenous peoples. And the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples has been established to oversee the implementation of indigenous rights policies. Despite the progress that has been made in promoting and protecting indigenous rights in the Philippines, there is still much work to be done. Indigenous peoples continue to face discrimination and exclusion from mainstream society, and their lands and resources are still being threatened by corporate interests and government policies. It is therefore essential that the Philippine government continues to take steps to ensure that the rights of indigenous peoples are respected and that their voices are heard in the decision-making process. Only then can the indigenous peoples of the Philippines enjoy the full protection of their rights and have a say in the development of their communities.